Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 2003 movie titled National Security. Now, National Security is an action comedy that runs for 88 minutes long. It is directed by Dennis Dugan, and it is produced by Moritz Bormann, Martin Lawrence, Peaches Davis, Nigel Sinclair, and Jeff Quantenitz. The script, and Robert Newmayer. The script was done by Jay Sherrick and David Ron. The score was done by Randy Edelman. The cinematography was done by Oliver Wood. The editing was done by Deborah Neal Fisher. And the stars of the movie are Martin Lawrence, Steve Zahn, Eric Roberts, Colm Feore, Bill Duke, Timothy Busfield, and Robinne Lee. Now, here's what I want to tell you about this movie. You know, it's actually really hard to evaluate the typical buddy cop action comedy films. I mean, many have tried to do it, tried to emulate the Lethal Weapon series, movies like Tango and Cash, Running Scared, and this one too, National Security. Now, unless they have an eye for creativity, or unless the viewers can get a feeling of an experience that seems original to them, then more times than not, most films of this genre just simply fall flat. The story of National Security is more flatter than 20 pancakes with moist syrup. The formulaic collaboration between two contrasting security guards, played by Martin Lawrence and Steve Zahn, are assigned to coexist to solve a very difficult initiative in hopes that they could rectify their friendships and to gain the respect for each other. Apparently, Hank Rafferty, played by Steve Zahn, and Earl Montgomery, played by Martin Lawrence, well, they have a complete dislike for each other, and for a very good reason. You see, Hank used to be a police officer until his partner was gunned down, and then through a video camera it looked as though as if he was beating up on Earl. Earl pleaded that he did assault him, when really he was just trying to fend off a bee that was buzzing around him, because it is discovered that Earl is allergic to bee stings. But Earl did not take Hank's side, so Hank was incarcerated for 6 months, and he lost his status as a police officer, so now he's been demoted as a security guard. Whereas Earl is trying to get into the police academy, but he got kicked out of the academy for some kind of misbehavior, so instead he ends up as a security guard. So now they're both security guards, both of them are trying to get into or to get back into the police force, but now they also have a crime on their hands, even though they don't have that authority to do the things that cops do. The only minor change in this film is that these gentlemen, putting the terms loosely, is that these guys aren't cops, they're security guards. And the humor factor rests upon that even though they act like cops, they don't have the authority to the stuff that cops have, the legalities that they are permitted to do. Does that mean this is still a great comedy? Not exactly. The leading protagonist, Earl, played by Martin Lawrence, and Hank, played by Steve Zahn, only meet by default, when only we discover that Earl and Hank are teaming up after learning that Hank lost his partner in a botched armed robbery. So the scriptwriters Jay Sherrick and David Ron who haven't really wrote outstanding pieces before, and this script is definitely no exception. And it seems that like their credibility has never blossomed since then, and they continue to write mediocre scripts for mediocre movies. We see the same nonsense as Hank and Earl constantly bicker with each other, only to acknowledge that each one has a mirrored lifestyle to some extent. The discovery is kind of a joke, but in reality it's the only mechanism they have for them to connect. Seriously, this joke is what makes them friends? The director Dennis Dugan, who has had his fair share of triumphs and failures, at least does his best to maintain the film to be as consistent as possible. If I were to praise this movie, it would have to be that the pacing actually is pretty good for an 88-minute film. I mean, this film only lasts 88 minutes, but at least it breezes by. I just only wish that this film was worth watching. Then I probably would have praised it a lot more. In terms of performances, Steve Zahn plays the underwhelming straight guy, Hank, which would have been okay if only he had at least some charisma to add. I mean, the only thing he does is looks intimidating with that mustache and this perpetual angry expression on his face. But that really doesn't add very much flavor to the role. It's okay to play the straight guy, but at least have some panache to go with the character, and at least instill some funny moments with him. There's just not a funny moment within this character. It seems very obvious that even during the movie he was called different names. Were the editors on strike at the time that the performers could not remember their screen names? While Martin Lawrence does everything he could to stand out in his over-the-top comedic performance, even though his constant rambling that whenever things go wrong he has to blame his skin color for it, or he thinks that everybody owes him a favor because he's African American and that we should all take reassurance to him. In the end, his role is really just as inferior as the other performances. Repeating the lines, "what the problem is," tends to become really annoying, plus it lacks any cleverness or anything that's remotely funny. Sherrick and Ron was not very helpful in giving Lawrence anything funny to deliver, which makes him a dull, wanton, dry, comical character. Nothing more, nothing less. The sad part comes from the supporting cast. The supporting cast feature a plethora of seasoned veterans who have been around the film industry at some point, and even they didn't have much to showcase their screen talents. Colm Feore, for example, stars as the corrupt head of the police department, who is in on this whole situation, who's in on this whole crime spree. And this doesn't come as a surprise because I've seen many roles like this once too many times, and I know Colm Feore is a veteran stage and screen veteran, but he doesn't really have very much going for it, and his character is dry, one-dimensional, and doesn't really have very much character development. Bill Duke, who has starred in a couple of Arnold Schwarzenegger films in the 80s, most likely Commando and Predator, also plays the other police chief along with Feore, and he also seems to be a pretty dry character too. Eric Roberts, he just plays a one-dimensional villain henchman whose only credibility is just simply being there. there's really nothing much to his role. And add to that, Steven Tobolowsky is just here to play some technological expert who's some kind of a snitch towards our two protagonists, and he really also doesn't have much to write on his resume. I mean, where's the common sense behind hiring veteran performers and not letting them exhibit their their bravado as top-notch performers? I know these guys can do a whole lot better, but there really isn't much going for them. This is a really, really forgettable buddy cop film. And this is the flaw that is actually way above the rest. What exactly was the motives behind the leading antagonist's reason for stealing certain items? All we know is what its usefulness is for, and that coming into it comes an abundance of cash, but there's no further explanation as to how this thing is applicable, which is not very fulfilling in my curiosity. And in the end, the humor factor is only minimal, and it's also quite cheap in its delivery. The special effects and the action scenes, yes, are pretty exciting, but it's still very inferior to the Lethal Weapon series. And the real upsetting thing is that the music score by Randy Edelman was there, but it was definitely overlapped in the background, almost as if there was no score, which is a shame because Mr. Edelman often produces great quality music. So overall, with acting being only average at best, and a script that is only half-baked, this film is only custom made for average at best film viewers. Even with top-of-the-line performances and steady pacing, this doesn't make the film stand up above the rest. If I was to give this movie a scale out of 10, I would have to give it a 5. It's just a very average film. It might be good to watch as a guilty pleasure, but I would simply avoid it as a whole. I guess this ends my writer review, so thank you all for listening in. If you wish to subscribe to my channel, please feel free to do so. If you want to write a comment, do so. Remember, be kind, be courteous, and I will be back again with another movie review. So until then, this is Eric Corp Writer saying keep watching those movies, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.